Archaeologists have dug up thousands of clay tablets from the ruins of Babylon. Not myths, not legends, financial records, loans, interest payments, savings accounts, written in cuneiform 4,000 years before the first modern bank existed. And buried in those records is something strange. The wealthiest men in Babylon and the poorest men in Babylon earned money the same way, in the same city, at the same time. Same trade routes, same markets, same opportunities. Only one of them got rich. Today, I'm going to show you the exact rule that separated them. A rule so simple, you'll want to dismiss it in the first 10 seconds. Don't. Because the reason most people never build wealth isn't income. It's this rule. And most people are breaking it right now today without knowing it. Let's go back to Babylon. In the 1920s, a writer named George Clason studied the economic history of ancient Babylon and distilled its financial wisdom into a set of parables. The most famous one centers on a man named Arkad, the richest man in the city. Arkad started poor, a scribe no better paid than his friends, but he ended up owning more gold than the king's treasurer. His friends asked him the obvious question: how? Arkad's answer wasn't about a secret investment. It wasn't about a lucky trade. It was one sentence, and it's the same sentence recorded, in different words, across real Babylonian loan tablets from that era. A part of all I earn is mine to keep. Not what's left over, not whatever survives spending. A part, set aside first, before anything else touches it. Here's the number: 10%, not 50, not save aggressively. 10% of every single thing you earn moved aside before you pay a single bill. Real Babylonian debt records from this period show something else too. Average interest on loans ran near 20% a year. That's not a footnote, that's the whole point. In a world where borrowed money grew that fast against you, the people who survived and the people who got rich were the ones who flipped the equation. They made money grow for them at that same speed, instead of grow against them. Real loan tablets from cities like Sippar and Larsa spell this out in plain terms. A merchant lends silver. The contract states exactly what comes back, commonly close to a sixth more within the year, roughly 20%. No ambiguity, no fine print. The borrower knew precisely how fast the debt was growing against him, carved in clay before he ever touched the silver. That's the environment Arkad lived in, not a gentle one. A city where standing still with your money wasn't neutral. It was losing at a fixed, documented rate. The 10% rule wasn't a nice to have in that world. It was the only way to stop being on the wrong side of that equation. Here's the uncomfortable question. If this rule is 4,000 years old, tested across every economy since, why does almost nobody follow it? Because the trap isn't complicated. It's boring. Arkad's friends didn't reject the rule. They agreed it made sense. Then they didn't do it. They told themselves next month would be different. Next month, income would be higher, expenses would be lower, and then they'd start. Next month never came, not for them, not for most people today. This is the part modern banks don't advertise. Your spending will always expand to match your income, unless you remove a piece of it before you see it. Clason wrote this in 1926. Economists now have a name for it: lifestyle creep. The Babylonians didn't need the term, they just wrote the rule on clay and moved on, because they'd already watched it fail for generations. So what actually happens when someone applies the 10% rule for real? Arkad's parable lays out the mechanism, and it matches how compounding actually behaves. The first year, 10% feels like nothing, a rounding error. You barely notice the money is gone, and you definitely don't feel rich. That's the part that makes most people quit. The gap between the effort and the reward feels insulting. But gold, Arkad says, is a worker. Every coin set aside doesn't just sit, it earns. And what it earns, earns again. That's the second law he teaches. Put your savings to work and let the return generate its own return. Slow, invisible, and then, at some point on the curve most people never reach because they quit at year 2. Suddenly not slow anymore. Here's the second question worth sitting with. What if the number was never really 10%? What if 10% is just the smallest amount that's hard enough to notice and small enough that you can't talk yourself out of it? A gate, not a goal. Now picture the alternate version. What if Arkad had waited, like his friends did, for the right time to start? What if he'd told himself he'd save once he made more? The tablets and the parable both point to the same answer. He'd have died a scribe, not because he lacked opportunity, because he'd have spent his whole life reacting to money instead of directing it. The city would have built pyramids of gold around men just like him, and he'd have walked past every one of them broke, wondering why some people just get lucky. They didn't get lucky. They got first. That's the whole rule. 4,000 years old, sitting in the ruins of a civilization that understood something most people alive today still haven't figured out. The money you never see is the only money that actually makes you rich. Everything else, the raise, the bonus, the side income, just raises the ceiling on what you can spend. It never raises what you keep. The wealthiest man in Babylon and the poorest man in Babylon had the same access to gold. One of them decided, before spending a single coin, that a part of it was already gone, moved somewhere spending couldn't reach it. The other one waited for a better time to start. Only one of them became a story worth telling 4,000 years later. So here's the question worth arguing about in the comments. If you started the 10% rule today, would you actually keep it going through a bad month? Or is year 1 where it quietly dies for you too? Tell me which one and why. If you want to actually understand money instead of chasing tips that disappear in a week, this is the wealth ladder. Subscribe. The next video breaks down the rule Arkad's friends thought was optional and what it cost them.